God, I hate this.
Oh look, it's going everywhere. Hang on. Is anybody got a job?
What is that?
Oh look, it's everywhere.
Can't bear this bloody thing.
Late one evening, inside palace archives, King Charles stumbled upon a detail no one had dared mention aloud. Buried in the Queen's will was a clause, phrased yet powerful enough to rewrite Harry's future overnight. The advisors went silent. Phones stopped ringing. The room felt colder. This wasn't rumor, nor speculation, but ink and intention from the late monarch herself. So, why was it hidden? Who was meant to find it? And how could this single sentence reshape inheritance, loyalty, and the balance of the royal family forever? The shocking discovery. Behind the grand, storied walls of Buckingham Palace, a discovery emerged that could send shockwaves through the royal family and alter its dynamics in ways no one could have foreseen. What began as a routine review of estate documents became, for King Charles, a moment charged with both legal significance and deeply personal weight. Among the familiar papers outlining properties, heirlooms, and the careful distribution of wealth, one particular document stood apart, a sealed clause written in Queen Elizabeth's own hand, crafted during her final months. At first glance, it appeared as part of the estate's ordinary formalities, the kind of document Charles had seen countless times in his decades of royal life. But as he broke the seal and read the delicate, deliberate script, he realized this was no ordinary note of instruction. These were the Queen's final words, carefully concealed and intended for discovery at the precise moment when they could have the greatest impact. The clause addressed Prince Harry's inheritance, but not in the straightforward manner Charles might have expected. There was a structure, conditions, and intent that suggested a larger purpose than mere financial provision. The words on the page carried with them a mother's careful strategy, a blend of love, concern, and foresight designed to guide the family even after her passing. They were meant to shape the path forward, to encourage communication, reconciliation, and the preservation of bonds that had frayed over time. Charles understood immediately that this was more than a legal matter. It was a personal intervention, a final act by a mother who had spent decades navigating both family and monarchy with unwavering attention, now extending her influence beyond the grave. The clause itself was intricate. It laid out a clear inheritance for Harry, yet it was accompanied by stipulations that required thought, negotiation, and cooperation. This was not about wealth alone, but about connection and responsibility, a framework through which the late Queen sought to ensure that her grandson remained meaningfully linked to his heritage, to the family, and to the monarchy she had devoted her life to serving. Each word had been chosen with precision, balancing pragmatism and emotion, practicality and hope. Charles paused, reflecting on the subtle power of his mother's foresight. Elizabeth had always understood the delicate intersections of duty, affection, and consequence. Through this clause, she was extending a hand to Harry, offering an opportunity to reconnect, to bridge a divide that had lingered for years. At the same time, she placed a silent challenge before her eldest son, to navigate the responsibilities of kingship alongside the equally weighty duties of fatherhood and family unity. What unfolded in that quiet moment was both a revelation and a reckoning. The discovery of the hidden clause was a reminder that even in death, Queen Elizabeth had not relinquished her influence. She had left a carefully constructed path, one that could reshape relationships, challenge old resentments, and potentially bring fractured bonds back into alignment. King Charles uncovered a sealed clause in his mother's will, and what he found inside was nothing short of shocking. But what exactly did the Queen leave behind? And why would she include such a surprising clause? Now, let's uncover a grandmother's final gift, the Queen's intentions. This was far from an ordinary inheritance. Hidden within Queen Elizabeth's meticulously drafted will lay a clause that carried both immense wealth and an even greater emotional weight. The document outlined a substantial sum, roughly £20 million, but the money was not simply given freely. There were clear, deliberate conditions attached, designed not merely to provide financial security, but to guide, influence, and shape the relationships within the royal family long after her passing. This was a queen's final intervention, a carefully considered attempt to preserve ties that had frayed over years of distance, disagreement, and public scrutiny. One of the most striking requirements was explicit. Prince Harry would need to spend a minimum of 90 days each year on British soil or within Commonwealth nations. But this was not about returning to formal royal duties. Instead, the stipulation demanded meaningful engagement through charitable work or community-focused initiatives that aligned with the causes the Queen had championed throughout her reign. It was a call for connection, for participation, for Harry to maintain a tangible presence in the places that had shaped his heritage. Through this requirement, Elizabeth sought to remind her grandson of the bonds that existed beyond titles, publicity, or personal grievances, a gentle nudge to ensure that even distance could not sever the ties that mattered most. Even more personal was the portion set aside for Harry's children, Archie and Leot. Approximately £5 million was designated specifically for their education and upbringing, but not without stipulations. Trustees would oversee the funds, carefully selected and approved by both Harry and King Charles, ensuring a balance between parental guidance and oversight from the Crown. The intent was clear: to protect the children's connection to their British heritage, to prevent them from growing up entirely removed from the family and the land of their ancestors. In essence, Elizabeth's foresight extended not only to her grandson, but to the next generation, a subtle yet profound insistence that family bonds endure beyond estrangement and time zones. Accompanying the legal provisions was a deeply personal letter addressed to King Charles. It did not command or dictate. Instead, it spoke in the quiet, compelling voice of a grandmother who had spent a lifetime navigating the delicate balance between love and duty. The letter urged Charles to view this inheritance not merely as financial resources, but as an opportunity, a chance to extend a hand, to rebuild bridges, and to foster reconciliation between father and son. Through her words, the Queen conveyed her hope that fractured bonds could yet be mended, that past disappointments and misunderstandings might give way to dialogue, connection, and healing. Reading the letter, one could almost hear her voice, firm but tender, practical yet deeply emotional, aware of the limitations of time and circumstance, yet refusing to abandon hope. This inheritance, Queen Elizabeth made clear, was more than a gift. It was a carefully constructed framework for redemption, a final act of love that asked her family to rise above old grievances, embrace responsibility, and seize the opportunity to create unity where division had long taken root. It was a mother's and grandmother's final wish, a reminder that even in death, her guidance could shape the heart of her family, and through that guidance, perhaps even restore what had once been lost. The clause in the Queen's will came with a letter explaining her reason. But was it only this letter that gave it weight? Or was there an even more powerful document reinforcing her wishes? Now, let's dive into the Queen's masterstroke. The hidden clause. The clause was no casual addition to the will. Every line had been meticulously composed, drafted in close consultation with the Queen's most trusted legal advisors to ensure it could withstand any scrutiny or challenge. Elizabeth's hand guided not only the letter of the law, but the subtle currents of human emotion, carefully weaving practicality with heartfelt intention. Each word was deliberate, chosen to strike the delicate balance between firmness and compassion, precision and tenderness. Nothing was accidental. This was a final act of strategic thought, a document shaped by decades of experience, foresight, and love. Queen Elizabeth understood the stakes at play. She knew that the rift between her sons had created not just personal hurt, but also a fragile tension within the family that had implications for the monarchy itself. With the clause, she sought to achieve several objectives simultaneously. At its surface, it provided Prince Harry with financial security, substantial yet measured, enough to ensure stability without overshadowing the deeper purpose. But the provision went far beyond wealth. It was designed to keep him connected to the United Kingdom and the broader Commonwealth, encouraging engagement in causes that mattered to the family and to the communities they served. In doing so, Elizabeth hoped that her grandson would maintain a tangible link to the heritage she had devoted her life to preserving. Equally significant was the careful attention given to Harry's children. The clause safeguarded their connection to Britain, ensuring that Archie and Leah would not grow up entirely removed from their ancestry or the extended family that had shaped their lineage. By establishing trustees approved by both Harry and King Charles, Elizabeth created a framework in which guidance, oversight, and support could coexist. She was aware that love alone was not always enough to maintain connection. Structure and tension were necessary to nurture relationships across distance, time, and generational divides. Perhaps the most profound element of the clause was its subtle demand for dialogue. Elizabeth's intention was not merely to transfer wealth or issue instructions, but to provoke a conversation between father and son, a bridge over years of misunderstanding and absence. In this, the clause functioned as both gift and challenge, a delicate invitation to reconciliation wrapped in the practicalities of legal obligation. It asked Charles to step into a role that blended authority with compassion, judgment with empathy, and leadership with vulnerability. The Queen trusted that her eldest son could navigate this complex terrain, weighing family loyalty, moral duty, and the larger interests of the monarchy. Reading between the lines, it was clear that the Queen's final act was profoundly strategic. She recognized the limits of her own influence, yet sought to extend her guidance beyond her life. By combining law, love, and careful planning, she left a tool capable of shaping the family's future, even if only partially. The responsibility now rested with Charles to honor that vision, to decide whether to enforce, interpret, or adapt the clause, and in doing so, to determine whether the bonds she had worked so hard to preserve could survive her absence. In every sense, this was quintessential Elizabeth, wise, measured, and unflinchingly devoted to family. Even in death, she had engineered a path forward, blending security, guidance, and hope into one master stroke, leaving her family a choice and a challenge that would echo through the years. The Queen enlisted the guidance of her most trusted legal experts to ensure the clause in her will carried real weight. But how will King Charles respond to it? Will it be easy for him to put into action, or will he need advice on the best way to navigate it? Let's find out. Crossroads. King Charles now stood at a crossroads that tested every facet of his identity. On one side was his role as a father, the intimate, deeply human part of him that had loved and worried over a son whose choices had caused years of heartache. On the other side was his responsibility as monarch, a figure whose every decision carried weight far beyond the walls of the family home, influencing public opinion, the reputation of the royal family, and the very stability of the institution he had inherited. The two roles collided in ways that made this moment profoundly complicated and emotionally charged. Harry's absence and the path he had chosen had left marks that were difficult to ignore. His public statements, sharp criticisms, memoir, and interviews had pierced through private and public defenses alike, leaving wounds that still throbbed beneath the surface. Charles had prepared himself for the challenges of kingship, for scrutiny, for political and public pressure. But no manual could have prepared him for the personal ache of feeling publicly judged and privately misunderstood by a son he had loved since infancy. The personal pain is intertwined with duty, making every decision heavier than it might appear to an outsider. Adding another layer of complexity was Prince William, Charles's eldest son and heir, whose loyalty to the institution and to his family was steadfast but sometimes uncompromising. William's insistence on boundaries and his protective stance toward his own family complicated matters, demanding careful navigation. His disapproval of Harry's choices, his reluctance to see reconciliation happen too quickly or without accountability, created tension that Charles could not ignore. The king understood William's perspective. He had once held the same hopes for family unity, and he respected his son's need to protect himself and his own family from potential harm. Yet William's rigidity could also block the very bridge Elizabeth had designed to mend fractured relationships. Now, Charles faced a delicate balancing act. The hidden clause in his mother's will carried not only legal authority but moral expectation, a subtle directive to use it as a tool for reconciliation, a way to repair what had been broken. To honor this final wish required more than compliance. It demanded diplomacy, empathy, and courage. Charles had to weigh the potential benefits of reaching out to Harry against the risk of further fracturing family bonds. Could he extend a hand without appearing weak? Could he uphold his mother's intention while maintaining authority and respect within the institution? Every choice seemed to carry both personal and public consequences. The decision would test Charles's wisdom, patience, and capacity for forgiveness like never before. It was a moment that demanded self-reflection, a willingness to confront past mistakes, and a careful calculation of how personal actions could ripple outward, shaping the monarchy's legacy. Every word, every gesture, every calculated step could either open the door to healing or deepen the divide. In truth, this was not just about inheritance or money. It was about trust, legacy, and the fragile threads that hold families and kingdoms together. The clause placed Charles in a delicate position. He had to honor his mother's final wishes while trying to keep the family together and safeguard the monarchy's stability. But is Harry even aware of this clause? And will following it be straightforward or stir more tension? Now, let's unravel a life in balance. Harry's dilemma. Far across the ocean in Montecito, California, Prince Harry remained entirely unaware of the extraordinary clause that had quietly emerged from his grandmother's will. Life on the West Coast had taken on a rhythm of its own, shaped by work, family, and the careful curation of distance from the institution he had left behind. Days were spent juggling media ventures, from interviews and speaking engagements to Netflix and philanthropic projects. Every commitment carried its own pressures, demanding a performance reminiscent of royal responsibilities, yet in a world that allowed him more autonomy, more control, and, most importantly, more personal safety. Meghan's presence was constant, providing support, counsel, and a shared commitment to the life they had painstakingly built together. Their home was a sanctuary, a place where privacy and protection could be maintained, far from the scrutiny and expectations that had once defined Harry's every move. Here, Harry and Meghan could navigate parenthood, career, and charity work without the endless commentary of tabloids or the unrelenting gaze of the public eye. They could focus on raising Archie and Liette in an environment they deemed nurturing, allowing the children to grow without the pressures of royalty weighing on every decision. Yet, the clause now waiting to be revealed carries with it a call to a very different life, one bound by expectation, visibility, and tradition. Spending 90 days each year in the United Kingdom or across the Commonwealth was not merely a logistical challenge, it was an emotional test. It meant exposure to the media that had haunted him for years, to public scrutiny that could reignite old traumas. It meant negotiating the delicate boundaries between duty, family, and mental well-being, balancing the desire to honor a grandmother's love with the need to protect his marriage, his children, and his own sense of peace. At its core, the clause represented more than an inheritance. It was a bridge, a chance for connection, a carefully designed path meant to repair fractures that had long been ignored or avoided. It offered Harry the possibility of reaffirming ties to his homeland, not as a forced return to duty, but as an opportunity to engage meaningfully, to maintain relationships with his father, his brother, and his extended family. It was a subtle acknowledgement that he and his children were not completely cut off, a reminder that the bonds of family could survive even if strained, if tended with care. For Harry, the challenge lay in reconciling this opportunity with the life he had built. Could he honor his grandmother's wishes while preserving the autonomy, privacy, and stability he had fought so hard to achieve? Could he accept this act of reconciliation without allowing it to unravel the carefully constructed balance of family life, career ambitions, and mental health? Every potential decision carried consequences, both personal and public, each requiring negotiation, reflection, and courage. The clause was more than money. It was a message, a gesture, a final attempt at connection. It asked Harry to weigh past wounds against future possibilities, to consider whether bridges burned could indeed be rebuilt. In that challenge lay both risk and reward, a delicate invitation to step back toward the family he had left, to honor his grandmother's love, and perhaps, finally, to find a way to integrate the two worlds he now inhabited. Far away in California, Harry had built a life filled with purpose, completely unaware of the hidden clause in his grandmother's will. But is a return to the UK really possible? And has he ever left clues that it might happen? Let's uncover the details. A glimpse of homesick longing. In a recent essay that captured the attention of both royal watchers and the general public, Prince Harry offered an unusually personal reflection on his connection to Britain. Far from the carefully curated public statements or media-managed interviews, this piece revealed a side of the Duke of Sussex that is rarely seen. The depth of his love and loyalty to his homeland. It was a subtle yet poignant acknowledgement of the country that shaped him, the nation he served, and the culture that remains a part of his identity, regardless of the miles that now separate him from its shores. In his writing, Harry described all the things that, to him, define being British, from the humor and wit to the shared history, the sense of community and the values that tie individuals to their nation. He painted a picture of a homeland he clearly cherishes. Among the lines, one passage stood out: "Though currently I may live in the United States, Britain is, and always will be, the country I proudly served and fought for." The words are simple, yet deliberate. They reflect not only admiration and pride, but also a careful choice of phrasing that hints at deeper currents. The emphasis on currently is particularly telling. It is not merely a statement of location, but a subtle suggestion that this is a temporary arrangement, that life elsewhere does not sever his ties to the UK. Similarly, the use of may introduces an element of possibility rather than certainty. Harry is signaling that his residence abroad is flexible, that circumstances could change, and that a return, at least in some capacity, remains within the realm of consideration. It is a clever balancing act. He acknowledges his current life in America, the family, projects, and commitments that anchor him there, while leaving open the idea that Britain still holds a magnetic pull. The phrasing also hints at emotion beneath the surface, a potential homesickness, a longing for connection to family, friends, and a country whose identity is woven into his own. It suggests that, despite distance and the controversies that have marked his public departure from royal life, Harry still feels tethered to the place where he grew up, where his roots run deep, and where his grandmother and the monarchy played central roles in shaping his early experiences. For observers, the subtlety of Harry's words carries enormous weight. It raises questions about whether a physical return to Britain is possible, whether a re-engagement with royal duties, formal or informal, might be on the horizon, and how these personal feelings could intersect with larger family and institutional considerations. Is this a quiet olive branch to the nation and his family, or simply an honest reflection of love for a home that cannot be fully left behind? In either case, the essay opens a window into Harry's inner world, revealing a man caught between two worlds, the life he has chosen in California and the homeland that shaped him, that calls to him, and that remains an enduring part of his identity. Even in the midst of independence, distance, and the complexities of his public persona, there is a hint that the pull of Britain remains strong. A possible return, whether literal or symbolic, appears not just as a distant hope, but as a subtle unfolding possibility, a reminder that family, heritage, and country continue to matter, even across thousands of miles. Harry has hinted at a possible return to the UK, openly confessing his love for his homeland. But will King Charles wait for his son's uncertain decision, or seek advice on the best way to handle the situation? Now, let's delve into the decisions that could shape the monarchy. Navigating the fragile path forward. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with delicate choices and high stakes. King Charles found himself at the intersection of personal responsibility, family loyalty, and the expectations of an entire nation. His mother's hidden clause had not only conveyed a significant inheritance for Harry, but also set in motion a series of potential actions that would require careful consideration, negotiation, and emotional intelligence. Every step carried weight. Every decision threatened to ripple far beyond the walls of the palace. Charles's advisors, seasoned in both law and palace politics, recommended a cautious, hybrid approach. First, a formal legal notice would be sent to Harry, ensuring that the inheritance and its conditions were communicated clearly, properly, and without ambiguity. This would protect the family institutionally and maintain transparency in the eyes of the law. But alongside this, a personal letter from Charles himself would accompany the legal documents, a measured, heartfelt gesture designed not to command, but to invite. It would create a doorway to dialogue, an opening for communication that had been absent for years. The balance between formality and intimacy was delicate, yet essential. Should Harry accept the inheritance as it stood, a host of negotiations would inevitably follow. Trustees would need to be appointed to manage the children's funds, timelines would have to be agreed upon, and the stipulations of the clause, such as the 90 days in the UK or Commonwealth, would require practical coordination. Even the most carefully crafted conditions would demand flexibility and understanding from both sides. Acceptance would not mean automatic reconciliation, but it would create a framework for interaction, a space for engagement where previously there had been silence and distance. Rejection, however, was equally complex. If Harry declined the inheritance, the consequences would extend beyond legal matters. The public would interpret it, speculate, and form narratives, some sympathetic, some critical. Media coverage could spin even the Queen's final act of peacemaking into controversy, portraying it as manipulation, indulgence, or failure. The optics mattered almost as much as the legal realities, adding another layer of pressure on Charles to weigh every word, every gesture, and every potential outcome. Perhaps the most likely scenario lay somewhere between full acceptance and outright refusal. Harry might comply with the technical requirements, meeting obligations while keeping an emotional distance. He might spend the necessary time in the UK or Commonwealth, engage in charitable work, and fulfill the conditions, yet maintain a protective wall around his heart, guarding against vulnerability or reconciliation that felt premature. In this scenario, the inheritance would act as both a bridge and a buffer, a chance to reconnect while preserving autonomy, a partial step toward healing that could evolve. Through all of this, one fact remained clear. Elizabeth had left a roadmap, intricate, fragile, and full of hope. Every word of her final instructions reflected her desire for connection, for family bonds, to endure despite fractures. The responsibility now rested with her successors to interpret that guidance, balance competing priorities, and act with courage. What the family chose next would resonate far beyond personal relationships. It would shape public perception, influence the monarchy's image, and define the legacy of those entrusted with its care. In the shadow of a grandmother's final gift, the future of the royal family hung in balance, a delicate mix of risk, possibility, and a hope that even fractured bonds might one day be rebuilt. So, what do you think about the clause in the Queen's will? Could Harry truly return to the UK? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe.